We are not.
Okay, so this is a meeting of the Finance Committee. It's October 30th. Present are committee members. Did Robinson leave?
No, just stepped down.
Robinson stepped out for just a minute. He'll be back. Farrell, O'Brien, and Appears, and also Mr. Kimbrough, Ms. Fahey, Ms. Love, Mr. Flynn, Mr. Hoey, and also our city clerk are also present, along with our trustee, senior legislative aide, who I'm very appreciative for all of her assistance in getting this stuff together. So I've mentioned, what? Oh, Mr. Inani, I'm sorry. What?
I missed them on purpose. But I went back to it. I went back to it.
So I have noted everybody's been provided with a copy of the increased responsibilities for this position. I know that some people have concerns about the amount of the salary increases for certain positions, and when DGS appeared before us, people were asking questions about we want to make sure that when there is a salary increase of significance, that there's increased responsibilities. And when it's in the budget, because we have no say over salaries in the budget, it sort of gets adopted as is. In this case, we're asking to take a proactive position to authorize the increase. So it's about another $2,000 that would be allocated to this position in 2019 for the remainder of this year if we were to pass this. Further discussion.
Well, I have a question. The right margin seems to cut off words on the position description.
Oh, I haven't,
Yeah, it was in it.
that's why.
It's still cut
You
off.
still cut off?
Yeah.
That's what they sent me.
Can you
So I printed
update
out.
of the blank?
I was able to print this myself. What are we missing?
just
Probably the last
the-
word on each line.
So for the most part, let me see the chart if I can.
That's how it was printed out.
Oy. Oh.
I'll wrap the column and email it.
Here, how about somebody
has-
copy
I-
this? Yeah. We'll come back to that. All right. So I also emailed to people copies of our city charter provisions with regard to the budget. I wanted to make sure people had the direct language out of the charter with regard to what the process is. It needed to be introduced on October 1st. We have to either amend or pass it as is, or take no action, or we will be deemed to take no action by November 30th. If we take no action, then the budget becomes the budget as is on that date. And the language actually of the charter allows us to make amendments, but then it explicitly exempts things like salaries and legal obligations such as like the debt service. There is also a requirement in here for a 5-year capital plan that will clearly list the summary of its contents, a list of all capital projects to be undertaken during the ensuing 5 years, cost estimates, sources of funding, and where appropriate, recommended time schedules for each improvement. And it's supposed to be updated and revised each year with regard to capital improvements still pending.
I'm sorry, Judy, where are you?
I'm in the city charter provisions.
Was that handed out?
Oh, I
Is it
asked,
here? Is this it right here?
where is
Section
that?
604? Right.
Okay.
Where, I'm sorry.
Yes, here it is.
Yeah,
Where
it's
is
about
it?
halfway through the packet.
Oh, there we
Yeah.
go.
section 604.
It
Yeah.
says section 604 at the top of the page.
Right, and so on page 2 is where it talks about the 5-year capital plan, and it's supposed to contain a clear general summary of its contents, capital projects to be undertaken during the ensuing 5 years, cost estimates, sources of funding, and where appropriate recommended time schedules for each such improvement. And it's supposed to be revised, updated, and extended each year with regard to capital improvements still pending, which we never get in the budget, or in the process of construction or acquisition, which has been a source of frustration for the Common Council as we review the budget each year. So I just wanted to make sure everybody had that, to understand a little bit about where our authority comes from and what some of the limits are and what the expectations are for this budgeting process. I've allocated 5 minutes for discussion on this particular item on the agenda, just in case anybody had any specific questions, wanted to pursue any line of questioning on this particular issue, but mostly it was, let's lay that out as a foundation and understanding for where we are.
Just a clarification point. So the November 30th, that does not include the bonding ordinances, correct?
Correct.
I didn't think so, but I wanted to make sure.
So, the interesting thing is that in essence, whatever happens with that budget, what they provided us with and what was introduced is then what becomes the capital plan. But that's the capital plan, unless we've amended it. And, the mayor does have the ability to veto and we would have to override. But to the extent it requires borrowing, borrowing requires a 2/3 vote. Per our debt policy requires a 2/3 vote of the Common Council. So each borrowing needs to be approved separately for them to have the authorization to bond for any of those projects.
Well, I always, and I think we've talked about in the past that when you have a 5-year plan, you can begin to, it would be helpful to have a narrative about, long-range goals, that type of thing, with regards to, where we're headed. And that's something that is missing with the capital plan as it stands.
Repeatedly.
Yeah. So I, that might be something we want to point out in our in our budget memo.
So last year in our budget memo, we pointed to this section and noted that that budget was woefully inadequate in this regard. And we also pointed to the PFM report that basically said, you don't have a capital plan, you have a listing of projects that you want to borrow from. We highlighted that language in our budget intent memo. The OSC talks about appropriate budgeting best practices with regard, and I'll read from last year's borrowing, a budget intent memo. A multi-year capital plan should provide accurate, reasonable estimates of each project's budgetary impact, debt service costs, impact on capital reserve funds, fund balance, and future operating expenditures. The consultant said the city should develop a full capital budget and plan that lists and also includes descriptions of each project, include its funding type, sources, whether it's expected to result in a long-term asset, life cycle planning in the long run, should have a quarterly report on the construction purchasing status of all uncompleted capital projects, and establish a formal process for vetting, qualifying, and annually funding an affordable group of projects tied to a formal project evaluation system. All who think we've been doing that the last few years, raise your hand. So Kathy?
Joyce, can you put one? Thank you.
In addition to that being part of that, I emphasized it to Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Blaze shortly after last year's process, partially because this is such a frustrating process when it comes to the bonding. And again, in the spring, with our borrowing, remember they asked us to move it up, and we did it in January and February this past year at their request. And it's pulling teeth from the different departments to get any kind of information. And Mike Wheeler promised me we were going to do things differently. We were going to be given a packet at the time the budget is introduced. And I said, Mike, the charter requires a lot of this stuff to be in the budget. This is not a capital plan. You need to be looking at, and I have repeatedly over the last year, including when Nick Blaze came before the Finance Committee to talk about this upcoming budget, provided them with a copy of our budget intent memo, turned to that page, and I said, you guys need to be reading this. So, bottom line is, we are being ignored. The consultant's being ignored. This is not best practices. And I don't know quite, what we do about this situation, because it takes up, and if they had, so I have provided everybody with a summary table that I worked on for, like about 6-8 hours yesterday. Michelle started, and I want to give her credit for, starting that process for me. But then I went through all of the handouts that we've gotten in various formats to put some basic information on a few sheets for you to know all these wonderful 21 different projects. And I kept on asking myself, why are we bonding for this whole amount? So I asked that question of Mike Wheeler. I'm a part-timer. We don't have staff. We don't have staff to be doing that. We have a whole budget office who are looking for raises this year, in which we have made this clear, and we've made it, and I've made it clear to David in the mayor's office as well. And basically they're thumbing their noses at us with regard to that. I put together that, and you will find it a lot easier to figure out what's going on than the haphazard way in which we've been giving this piece of paper here and this piece of paper here and this piece of paper here. What I have done is essentially what Mike promised me would be done last year, along with some additional backup documentation. But we still don't have documentation for some of the things that bonding has been asked for. And we will be, discussing that as we go through some of those bonding ordinances. Now we've taken.
When was the last time the administration responded to one of your requests?
What?
When was the last time the administration responded to one of your requests?
Well, it's interesting. Today I got a call from Nick Blaze, but not about what I had asked for, what they wanted from me. More adjustments to the budget.
I'd like to just add to what you're saying, because we also did an audit, and we made the recommendations, exactly what you're talking about, that we were supposed to have some worksheets that did timelines and when we should borrow, and they said they were going to do that, and it was one of the capital projects to present to the common council. So, again, reiterating exactly what you're saying, and it was put in the audit, and they still haven't done that.
So, and I gotta be clear. This is about me being interested and us all being able to make the best decisions possible on behalf of the residents of this city, coming up with an affordable capital improvement plan that makes sense. And it is, it's simply disturbing to me that after the consultant has made this point 2 years ago in the 2017 report. And we've pointed out these deficiencies for the last 2 years, that there doesn't seem to be any interest in putting together a real capital plan, as opposed to a list of things they want us to borrow for. So I'm sorry for, it is clearly not in accordance with the OSC's recommendations for best practices, what is going on. And one of the reasons why I find this budget to be deficient.
Wish
In
one of the
it,
staffers were here, you know?
what?
I'm saying, you're saying a lot, and I wish one of the staff from the budget office was here during this type of discussion. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing to provide this information, but again, this is the budget season, and I
This-
think that it will be
Well, they have
important
been in all the previous meetings, and they heard the critique.
that no one is here.
It's not like there hasn't been any progress, though, in terms of the way they're operating. Is that correct? There have been progress, has been progress in terms of some of the issues that you've brought up previous
They gave
years?
us a budget that didn't have a 5-year capital plan, even the listing of
Like I
projects.
said, there's been some progress.
Increment.
And then they had to give us, a new page. And then I believe they gave us, I forget, I've lost track of where we have, replacement pages after replacement pages. But I think for the capital plan, the 5-year capital plan they gave us, they weren't even aware. Yeah, so I have 2 copies of, extra copies of page 89. This is what they gave us after I called to their attention that that 89 was simply a duplicate of 87. And then this is what they provided on October 17th, that they're asking us to adopt. They're asking us to make these changes, these amendments to the budget.
Judy, I can tell that you're very frustrated, rightfully so. You've taken the lead on this and you've done a lot of work. How can we support you to basically move the conversation forward? What support do you need? I know you've sent countless emails to Mike and others requesting information that you have not received. Based on your experience, how can we support that? Do you have suggestions? Do you want us to make follow-up requests, phone calls? What do you need us to do?
So,
That's a good question.
personally, there's other problems with this budget besides the fact the capital plan does not exist in it as required by the city charter. That includes this whole issue of where they're concealing that it grows by $1.8 million. And they're concealing that by changing the way they're accounting for debt service. While we owe, our obligations are $23.6 million next year for debt service. They put in the budget $21.8 million. And what they've, as an expenditure, in the expenditure column. So when you budget, you put all your expenses over here and you say, okay, how am I going to pay for it? Here's my revenues. Here's my revenues. Here's what I'm going to, move from other funds over here. And whatever I don't have in the way of income and revenues and transfers from, that's what I need to raise in the way of taxes. That is what Budgeting 101, the OSC's report that I sent in the little booklet that I sent you guys, basically says. Instead of putting the full expenditure over here, they're saying, instead of $23 million, we're going to say it's $21 million. So that reduces all of the bottom line expenditures from $181 million to $179 million. And the way we decide that the debt service is not $23 million is because we're going to say, we're going to take some money out of the debt reserve and apply it to that before we put it in the expenditure column. That's a transfer of funds that belongs on the balance sheet on this side, your appropriations. It belongs on the appropriations and income side, and that's what the OSC will tell you, because I've had 2 conversations with people over there about this. Because I had to go, oh, Mike Wheeler, Darius, and they are saying that Ken approves of of this mechanism. Well, when I was on the school board, and you're required to have financial training, that's not what I was told.
Are
Doesn't-
there severe implications for doing it the way that they are proposing that we need to be mindful of? Or is it preference, and your preference is based off of these national guidance and standards?
Another good question.
So, when I was having the conversation with the person from the OSC, I sent you guys the follow-up note that I got from that person. Essentially, what she is reminding us of is this document, is this administration's authorization to spend. So we adopt this, that's their spending authority for the year. So we are authorizing to spend $21.8 million on debt service next year when our obligations are $23.6 million.
So, Judy, why would we support this budget? Because I hear our auditor raising questions about stuff that I really don't know about as much as you do. So when you speak, it's like, the expert is speaking. And I mean that, literally, because you know more about this stuff than most people sitting at this table. So.
And I want to say, that last statement might be true. I don't know that qualifies me as a quote-unquote expert, because there's a lot, I don't have an accounting degree, but I do know when I have a question, to call somebody like the OSC and say, is it me? Is this just me? And for OSC essentially to say, you're then not authorizing the expenditure unless it shows up in the expenditure plan, and you're not authorizing the transfer from the debt reserve, and they want to include this as a footnote because they want to do this fuzzy way of doing it, and it meets one purpose, and that is to reduce the total amount of the budget.
You say that Ken approved this. Did you ever get an opportunity to talk to Ken directly?
No.
Because Ken, I've heard that too, and I'm just like, I didn't ask Ken specifically, but I would ask Ken specifically directly, because Ken is a person of integrity. Ken Bennett, he's the deputy treasurer.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know the answer to the question. I did not ask him either. And but it'd be interesting to me, because Ken does the reports to the state. And Ken is a person of integrity, and he's not part about this fuzzy thing. But I hear what you're saying, because it's a balance sheet item. It's not part of this budget. So it surprises me that when somebody says, well, Ken says it's okay. I like to hear it from Ken.
And Julie, if I could just go further,
Yeah.
because some information got out of DGS about things that they were doing down there, and what they're doing now is they're in spin control, trying to still orchestrate the plan that they're going to do it, but trying to not get the noise about it, because there's people grumbling, and like the problem that I'm having is that people are reaching out or sharing their feelings about it, and they feel like they don't have anybody that they can go and talk to. Now, Jerry ran this town the way he ran this town, but it was always people that you could go and talk to that would, that he would listen to, and you could jam them up in that way. But in this scenario, people feel like they have no one to talk to. So when I hear stuff like that, the workers' morale is high, that's the opposite, the exact opposite that I'm hearing, and not just from minorities, from white folks, from people that have been working for these positions for years. And and me working in Parks and Recreation, when you hear it said that they can't compete with people, like, number one, they're not losing people to the district because it's a night job. The district isn't offering night positions like that. So I just find it hard to understand the high turnover that we have experienced in the last 6 years in that department, when if you looked at that department historically for 20 years before that, people stayed in those positions forever. So, you know, like, I just feel like we are becoming a city that is trying to recruit workers from outside of Albany, and, you know, people.
Administrators.
Well, no, not that, that started out like that, but if you look at the entry level position, the conversation, and it's low and it's close to the circle, that they're trying to look and lift what, the city waiver on entry level positions as well. And that's a problem. And, you know, for this to be the third budget,
Just
and
don't worry
pretty
about
much
it.
the same standard operation, it just, it's hard. It's hard to say, you know, that I can support something like this when I'm hearing people giving us red flags that something is not right.
So so I hear you, you know, and you know, another problem with this is that I've asked Michelle to make a copy of the technical amendments that they're asking us to make to their budget as introduced. And that includes, because they couldn't keep track of what they were doing in this way, there's another part of the budget that needs to be amended to make it consistent with this new way that they're doing it. But there's also another issue with, some people sat here when I said, oh, the numbers on your expenditure page don't add up. They're $10,000 off. So they've now come back and they've said, okay, well, that was a manual entry error, increased retirement by $10,000. So I'm like, okay, now we're making the amendment. So we bear responsibility for that a little bit more. So I went into the budget book and I added up all the things that go into retirement. Their retirement figure in this book is $500,000 less on the summary page. It's $500,000 less on page 10 than appears in other places in the budget book.
So that makes a $2.5 million hole already that you took.
No, it's not a hole. This, you know,
It's under budget.
The debt reserve, them transferring $1.8 million from debt reserve is just something that shows up on the revenue page, and you add it as an expenditure, and let's just do what we're supposed to be doing in the way of open and transparent bookkeeping here and budgeting practices here. This is another issue that I asked for an explanation for, and they, you know, gave me some gibberish about, well, you know, the numbers roll up differently, et cetera. I have no explanation regarding that. I have a suspicion about what it is about. I think that they roll in the challenge line from the police department as a savings into retirement somehow or other, which is completely crazy. We also have the issue in this budget book that we're kind of used to. Let's go ahead and hand those out. That we've kind of winked and nodded at, you know, the last couple of years, where they're budgeting for 7 FTEs as police recruits, and then they have no funding associated with it. And then they add those recruits to the, I don't know why.
They do it like that.
Why are we doing that? Especially at this particular point in time where we are having such problems with regard to staffing there. So here's the problem. I'm somebody who's like, okay, so this is a problem. We need to fix this. How do we fix it? Well, I can't fix a $500,000 hole in the budget. I can't fix their fuzzy math on, you know, they're potentially rolling up a challenge line savings into a retirement expenditure. That doesn't make sense to me. What I am thinking is for us to go ahead and make a couple amendments with regard to the debt service item, and then directing them to provide us with a budget that is reasonable, clear, structural, and balanced, and addresses these issues, addresses the issues of the retirement, address the issue of the numbers not adding up on that page, address the fact that you have no capital budget and you're not complying with our city charter, address the issue that you are putting 7 extra FTEs into the police department, and potentially ask them to address the inequitable raise issue where we're asking our workers. I know a number of people, I think that that's a little bit more, controversial given, what is here. The mayor can veto this. Right. The mayor can also challenge our authority to change the debt service number. But man, oh man, I don't know why she wants to walk into that potential legal liability, which I think potentially affects our credit rating if she doesn't have the authorization to pay the full amount of debt service. And if they are engaging in practices that are, and here's the thing is what they're doing now is with regard to that debt service is different than what they did last year.
Judy,
setting a precedent. So if we pass this with that debt service issue.
Oh no, I'm recommending that we amend it, make it clear that we're not authorizing, amend the ordinance to make it clear we're not authorizing the tax levy according to this. We're amending the budget and asking the mayor to take care of additional amendments.
are these the amendments that were requested, or these are separate from the technical amendments requested? So on top of the technical amendments that the mayor's office requested that the council take care of, you are recommending that we make additional amendments, and that includes to the debt service. And these amendments.
But I don't even want them to make these technical amendments, because one of these technical amendments is for their version of what to do with the debt service.
So I'm trying to follow
sorry.
your train of thought. So the additional amendments to the debt service that you want the council to make are not aligned with the mayor's perspective on how the information should be presented in the budget. Is that what I'm hearing? Because you talked about the vetoing. So if I'm hearing you correctly, the amendments that you want to make regarding the debt services, we do have the authority to do that. On the flip side, are you suggesting that the mayor will not be in agreement with these amendments that we are making, and as a result will veto these amendments? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, she can veto, and we could override with 10 votes that veto.
But I think we should,
She could also,
I think we would want to understand the consequences of going this route too. You mentioned our credit rating.
Well, the credit rating would fall because of what's already in there, not because of our recognizing that there's $2.5 million.
Well, we're bringing it to the public's
we're giving it
attention.
daylight.
We're giving it daylight, which I think is always good.
And who is saying that the credit rating will fall as a result?
Oh, Judy. And
Well,
Perhaps-
I'm saying that that if the city, if this budget goes into effect, and it currently only has $21 million worth of authorization for debt service, and we owe $23 million, what does that tell any creditors?
Well, perhaps, does it make sense to start looking at doing an amendment, outlining the issues that would be in the amendment, bring it to their attention, and ask if it's not going to be corrected, we will be introducing this amendment? I know you've been bringing these issues to their attention. I'm just trying to I mean, ideally, it'd be better if they fixed it before we did that, right?
Well, that's why I'm suggesting that we pass an ordinance that makes the one amendment that we can make with regard to the debt service. With regard to fixing what they have done with regard to accounting, I'm not,
With the you're talking about with the footnote that was added to clarify why they made the change. Is that the
They
difference in the 21 versus the 23 million?
yeah,
That difference is based on how they reformatted the budget as relates to expenditures? Is that, are we?
expenditures and income.
But even if you went up forward with just that, Judy, would that have consequences that would be, not desirable as far as credit rating and so on?
What happened with this budget is not, what we were given is not desirable. You are aware of the number of additional pages? Do you even know, how to put all these?
I'm just saying if any of it
It's
can.
not desirable.
I'm just saying if any of it can be fixed without going that route, shouldn't we try to do that?
I've been trying to, and Mike Wheeler sat here and said, we're not agreeing to that change on debt service.
Because they feel that what they have offered is justified with the footnote that clarifies why they made that shift, correct?
I asked them to provide me with what they would want to put in the way of the footnote, and I let them know I was going to be talking to the OSC. They have provided, and that was, 3 weeks ago, they provided me with no language regarding a footnote. Frankly, when you need to footnote a budget rather than put the expenditures and the income where it belongs, you got to wonder why we're doing that.
Before we go, in my opinion, before we go ahead with an amendment, we should give them the opportunity, we should let them know that that's the route we're strongly considering and give them an opportunity to address it. Just, that would be my opinion.
So,
But I'm not on the committee.
Right, Judy, she can't resubmit a budget, right?
well, here's the
I
thing.
mean, it feels like there's a ton of errors in calculations there. It seems like-
Right.
This isn't just a few.
Well, the charter doesn't provide for that, but if there's, some sort of agreement reached that, that's what's appropriate, but they're asking me to institute amendments, that they're asking us to pass amendments that are outside of the normal budgeting and accounting principles, and it does not address, we've asked for 2 years for the capital budget to be addressed.
But that 2 million, Judy, is accounted for in the budget.
No, it's not.
It's not accounted for at all, is what you're saying.
Spend some time with the budget, find where it mentions anything about $1.8 million coming out of debt reserve.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily spending some time with the budget, because I have spent some time with the budget, and I've been a part of these meetings in which it sounds like you have a perspective. To the contrary, the administration has a perspective, and they feel that they are justified in their perspective, and that $2 million is accounted for, and that footnote justifies why they made that decision. Where we lie in the middle is, we have to make a decision. And so you have laid out all the things that are wrong with the budget that you want changed. In the event that those things are not changed, the question becomes, what are you recommending we do? You said you recommended ordinance be drafted, in which the mayor will more than likely veto. Kathy says she feels that there's a route that we should take before we get to that. And so I'm with you, but I want to reach some conclusion on what's the way forward, so that we're not talking in circles about the many problems that you've highlighted. What is the way forward? If you can make that plain and clear, I'm happy to.
So what would you recommend we do about the fact that retirement does not add up on the summary page? What would, I'm open to, other solutions. What is the solution for retirement does not add up to what the figure that they're giving us on the summary page for retirement.
What is the drop dead date to have all of the edits made to this budget before we vote on it? That's my question. What is the drop dead date?
November 30th.
Okay, so they in theory have until November 30th to make all of the proposed changes that we are requesting.
I would think that reasonable people would think that we would have it a couple weeks in advance.
But Judy, I think, again, it's a different
They've had-
perspective, and so there's still time to make the changes that they're proposing. It sounds like they're not making them in the timely manner that you would like.
They have expressed no interest in making any changes. And I have laid out what are, out of courtesy to the 15 members on the Common Council, I've laid out a plan that includes us acting on the budget by November 18th, the last regularly scheduled meeting of the Common Council. I have no interest in bringing people back in the Friday after Thanksgiving.
Okay. So
Or I guess maybe Saturday? Is Saturday the 30th?
So what I will offer to be proactive, the edits and changes that you are recommending, I will personally follow up with Mike Wheeler to ask him what is their plan for making the changes, and then they can get back to us with, yes, we plan to make changes to this by this date. We have no interest in making changes to this recommendation, and at least we walk away having an understanding of what they plan on making changes to by a specific date, or what they are and the other aspect of that is, and what things you have identified in which they're saying we are drawing a line in the sand and we are not making those changes. At least we know what we're dealing with in terms of absolute no, they're not changing, versus they just haven't gotten around to making the changes.
And Dorsey, you're saying you would reach out separately, but I think it would be helpful to have them here, talk about these specific things that we're talking about, putting in this amendment, and get their response. And then that would enable us to have.
So you have to understand that I have no idea of how to fix what they have done here. When the numbers don't add up, the numbers don't add up.
Well, at least if we could get their response to that,
And I just want to say, I do agree with both sides, and I think we could, there's a way that we can figure out, even finance committee members also asking questions, or even all of us asking questions, and also then asking them to follow up to come to a meeting. Because right now what it looks like is that most of the questions are coming from Judy, and I think that most of the budget office is probably looking like, okay, here comes Judy again, here comes with the question. But I think that having different voices asking some questions to the budget office, maybe we might get a response.
Yeah, I mean, they need to hear that.
Half the questions that were asked on November 7th during Mike Wheeler's presentation, in which, or in follow-up, I don't know, on October 10th, in Mike Wheeler's and Darius's presentations that I then followed up with, half of those have not been responded to.
Okay.
So, I got a question. Judy's the chair, the administration was in favor of Judy being the chair of the finance committee, right?
No.
Well,
They don't get to
let's ask the question, but you're the chair for a reason, right? They don't just put anybody as the chair, right?
No, it was this group that
Yeah.
elected me.
Well, I mean,
Oh, actually, it was Richard who appointed me when,
this is my point, and so, as the chair can't get the answers, the questions answered that's presented, that doesn't sound right. If we have a balance sheet, we have a spreadsheet that says one thing, and then when you dig into it, you find out it's another thing. And this has been kind of consistent with every budget that you've been hearing. And I know budgets come with discrepancies, but numbers, like that. It just speaks to itself. If it doesn't add up.
But I hear you, Councilman Johnson, but we still need to move forward. So I think we're all in agreement that
Question about the fee. What?
She should
Danielle's
be
also
getting
here
a
to answer your
response.
question about the merit sheet
She's not
Oh.
getting.
that you may have.
Oh,
We do a resolution.
That's not-
Monday,
But I
Saturday.
think
That's
that
not-
everyone has a responsibility to
Okay.
also
Your agenda?
ask questions too
Yeah.
regarding some
Yeah,
of
but-
the concerns.
but-
I don't think all of it should be solely on Judy.
Would that-
But
So I'm
I
saying
thought I noted
with
that it
your
goes to
actions
another
that
committee.
you're going to take, I support.
It does, but I thought you
kind
was
of follow up
gonna
with the
Yeah.
budget
talk about
director
it.
office to ask some of those questions.
I got it.
I just want-
If folks are in agreement with that, I was just saying, I don't think it should be all, like you said, I don't think it should be all on you, Judy, to be continuously emailing them, especially if you're not getting a response. I think they do need to hear from other members to say, look, we have to make decisions. We need this information in order to do that. I hear what Kathy is saying, bring them here and we go through it and everybody can hear the same thing at the same time. And maybe it's and versus or. So it's both. Some of us can reach out to them to follow up on your emails and have them come back and we go line by line on the edits and they can tell us clear and concrete
And
where they
please, no
stand
special
on.
meetings.
Well, on the, what you're considering putting in that amendment, I think.
Right, just the amendment, not go through line by line the budget, but the specific amendments.
They need to tell us what the amendments are to address our concerns.
Okay.
They need to provide us with a balanced budget. They don't really need to provide us with a balanced budget because they're, they've made their decisions regarding this. And
Judy, I asked, and also, I guess maybe even here, can we do a resolution on Monday asking for a balance? Well, for them to go back and look at the budget and balance it and get back to us. Would that, I know it's not binding, but it shows that the council is upset. And I'm just throwing that
Well,
out.
also,
Council-
council
Council-
did that in
you-
the budget resolutions of the last several years. And then-
I'm sorry,
Well,
I
so we're
can't, I'm
taking
sorry,
a
too many
serious
people are.
step here, but we want to make
No,
sure.
we were serious then.
Well,
I'll do it.
but the amendment would be a little more
And maybe it's necessary.
possible.
Kathy, do you think that this is going to result in them putting together a capital plan that complies with the city charter?
Judy, I really think it's a work in progress. I think that because of your leadership in particular, a lot of changes have been made to improve the budgeting process. We're not there yet, so that's kind of the way I look at it. So
This year, with regard to the bonding ordinances being a moving target, and me still not having clear answers about how much.
yes, but there's an improvement from previous years that we have bonding ordinances at this point, isn't it?
Oh, no, that is that is not an improvement. That is a matter of timing, preference. The process is not better just because the timeline has been moved up at their request. The process, they are as disorganized as ever when it comes to providing us with information regarding.
I understand a lot of sides of the issues, but one thing they asked of us as a finance committee, and it was mentioned earlier, that if we would accommodate them to, move the bonding ordinances up to a certain time frame so they can make the decisions that they need to make. And I feel like, that wasn't reciprocated with us. When we request things from them, they are not as adamant in making sure that, we get what we need so we can follow our full processes. And I think that you've done the adequate and appropriate outreach to them to get what's needed. I can go either way about inviting them back, to sit before us and tell us what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. But, for someone like me, I'm going to be going out on paternity leave for a couple of weeks soon. And so, I have a limited schedule.
You what?
I have a limited schedule within the next, month or so. And I'm pretty sure other council members have their schedules full as well. So.
When are you expecting? What's the date?
Oh, November, the 22nd, November 22nd.
That's exciting. Well, there's dates scheduled though, that
No.
for the finance committee. Bring them in. There's already dates scheduled for the finance committee.
Okay, so there's
I mean,
Judy, when's the next finance committee meeting?
It's, well, we have the full caucus on Monday. And then our next meeting after that is November 6th, next Wednesday.
But as for me, I will take the recommendation of the chair when it comes to.
Judy, have you asked the mayor's office to be there Monday or no? Or are you going to?
Ask the mayor's office to be here on Monday?
The budget caucus.
I mean,
I don't know,
I will say it's not like our meetings are secret.
I know what you're saying. I mean, if they're not going to address the issues, what are you going to get? What's the meeting going to be for? Because it seems like there's a lot of issues.
I think an amendment would be the conscientious thing to do.
If they're not going to be here, then what else are they for?
So I have asked people to let me know, if you have other issues. My agenda here lists a bunch of issues that and I have other issues listed there. And I, was, it's a mystery to me how we move forward in this process and have any integrity, I want to say. With regard to if we're going to, just let them adopt. Yeah, I mean, if basically if people say what the mayor, has presented to us is okay, or let's just make their technical amendments that they've requested and go along with their fiction in this, including 7 more FTEs in the police department, including that, there's really $500,000 less allocated in this budget for retirement than there is.
Do we have the authority to amend that retirement line by $500,000?
We're not really amending. Yes, we do, because all we're doing is correcting.
A mistake.
Well, I don't know if it's a mistake
Or a misstatement.
it's a misstatement.
Yeah.
A misstatement. Do we think it's appropriate? But the problem is, you increase that line by $500,000, what do you decrease?
So is this something where, just from what, in terms of giving the heads up, is it something that you can say, I have the support of the finance committee to move forward with this amendment if you guys don't do something about it?
Well, and again, the problem is, if I move forward with a debt service amendment, I'm not moving forward with a correction on the retirement line or anything on that, because I don't know what to do with it. I can't make a recommendation to you guys and say, oh, well, let's raise taxes by $500,000.
Right.
When again, I think it's tied up in their fuzzy math where the police challenge line, because that's the only thing I can, figure out, winds up being an offset against that. Does that make any sense to anybody? That you would list in retirement, you would total up what's in retirement. So you take, and there's only like 5 places where it appears in the budget, the retirement line. It's in undistributed employee benefits, in the fire department, and in the police department. And then there's, and also housing and community development. And then there's the 2 that are offline, which is the water and the, youth workforce services. So there's 4 places where retirement shows up in terms of what we anticipate we're going to pay in retirement. And now we're basically saying, oh, we're not going to pay that amount in retirement. We're going to pay arbitrarily $500,000 less. This is not common sense to me.
Okay, but put it on them to explain it. And I would agree.
Although we would have thought they would have done that already.
Yes, Mike, but now it's something that I think everybody's paying attention. I mean, let's
I
face it,
asked,
Judy, we rely so much on her to be taking the time to go through this line by line. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But it kind of takes everybody else off the hook in some ways. And so even though there has been discussion, I don't think, until tonight, and then we've heard some of these issues several times now that people are starting to really focus on it. So now might be the time when, it's not just Judy asking them, it's all of us asking for explanations.
I will say that just in general, I do find it troubling, especially that there's a chair is not getting a response from the department.
so Kathy, I asked the question with regard to the retirement roll-ups. When they gave me the new figure that they want me to put into the budget,
Yeah.
I went and I added that up, and I didn't figure out that community housing needed to be in there. So I came up with like a, $270,000 difference between the number that they were giving me, and I asked how, And I was, told, I asked for an explanation, and what I was told was, oh, Judy, and I noted that there was some problem also with departmental income, because I was looking, that made me look elsewhere. I never focused on the fact that they might have been doing this in the past because I don't have access to the ERP system. Mm-hmm. I'm doing this, taking the book and manually doing this, and when they ask me to put a new number in, I always verify that new number. When I give you guys amendments, adjustments in salaries, I'm always verifying that information because I don't ask this body to adopt anything without having some level of certainty that it's accurate and reliable information. So when that happened, so I asked them, the question. And Mike Wheeler, rather than answering the question and providing me with the explanation,
It's all through email.
with him, Nick Blaze, and Nick Riley. And Nick Riley's the one who asked me to make that adjustment, or told me that that's the adjustment, and now it appears in the technical amendments that we're being asked to make. I said, it doesn't add up, and I was told that you just don't know what rolls up into what. And so that's when we all got that listing of the different accounts and what rolls up into what. And then I asked them, okay, I can't find, 7808 or whatever that was. So I looked at the other retirement things and still had this discrepancy.
So do you think if we, say to them that we are not going to move forward with the budget as is unless these technical amendments are made to give them enough time to decide if they want to make them or if they don't want to make them, would that be the best course of action? Because I believe you did your due diligence, and we as a committee did our due diligence in staying here for hours at a time. And coming over these numbers with you, I think we're owed a little bit more respect to get what we need and what we need.
Well, again, I would love for them to actually be put to task to actually produce a capital budget. If I can put together the document that I provided you guys with last night after 8 hours, then they can put together a capital budget in 5 days, which is what I would suggest we give them. But, in this, I'm sorry, this business of, they have a full year to put together a budget, and then we have 6 weeks, unless we want to schedule, the Friday after Thanksgiving, and then we have questions of quorums and all that kind of stuff. And we've been there, and I've done that, and it is unpleasant. Nobody wants to be doing that. We shouldn't be asked to be doing that. So I have put it on a time schedule. I think one of their problems with the budget that they produce is nobody in the administration has any idea of how to produce a reasonable timeline and keep people to it. So now Ms. Aplears is basically dissing me because it's not meeting my timeline.
I don't think she dissed you. I don't think she dissed you.
I think she offered another perspective.
Right.
Because it's not meeting your timeline, Judy.
I don't think that was disrespectful.
Yeah, well, you know, so if people disagree with my timeline, then people should speak up and tell me that my timeline is inappropriate and
What she did
suggestive.
was offer to help you. That was the offer. She offered to help you. I don't think there was no disrespect in it. I mean, I don't know Dorsey as well as some of you, some, you know, like you or, you know, some of you, but I don't see that in her.
I guess it's a little bit with the recent history that I'm reading that and taking that. So I don't know if I'm going to be voting for whatever budget. I would like to see an improvement in the budget. And that, you know, I think holding their toes to the line and saying, look, we're real. I want to mention that while this budget goes into effect by default on November 30th, if we don't act, or even if we vote against it in some way, it goes into effect unless we amend it and adopt it as amended. There is the issue of the fact that there's $1.4 million in this budget for a curbside waste collection fee that has sunsetted. And this administration needs 8 votes to have that $1.4 million. And I got to question if we're going to not have this budget be amended to be more transparent and in keeping with accounting principles, and be a more accurate representation of what's going on. I do wonder whether or not I'm going to vote to support it in any way, including voting for a trash fee. And I've been somebody who's been willing to bite the bullet on that in the past. But I'm that upset about.
So I just have a point of clarification. If we don't move, if we don't amend the trash fee to have a sunset date, it expires, and so that will leave the budget. They would be left, the administration would be left with for $1.4 million in the hole.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to happen concurrently, that vote with the...
With a budget?
Yeah.
Well, normally, I would think
Or
you
in
would
advance.
vote for that first before you vote on the budget.
Right.
But we can put that vote off until December.
Oh.
You know, we can see what happens in the way of amendments and what amendments might be vetoed, et cetera. And you know, let's just be clear. There was an accounting change that happened this year, and it serves one purpose. This budget went up by $1.8 million, at least $1.8 million more over last year than is represented in the budget. And it fits a certain narrative, and that should not be what motivates our accounting budgeting system. It is not an awful budget. Otherwise, I have some problems with some of the raises. I have some problems with the way they're, accounting, for some of these things that I think should be straightened out. I don't, there's not a whole hell of a lot of, changes otherwise. There are some changes that I don't necessarily agree with, but that's the administration's prerogative.
Okay, so
Anyway, so we will have a caucus on, a full budget caucus on Monday. And I think the answer is we're going to invite, Mike, who do we want to invite to next Wednesday's meeting?
Mike Miller for sure.
Ken Bennett.
And
Right, Ken Bennett.
what kind of business?
Well, I mean, I don't know the answer, I haven't asked Ken Bennett. But don't you think you'd want to hear it from him, our deputy treasurer, that reports to the state of why it's supposedly acceptable to have this $1.8 million difference in our capital? I'd like to bring something else up too. There's a special E&A meeting tomorrow because our Medicare payments to the retirees is about $50,000 or $60,000 that we weren't able to pay 100 and some people because budget did not do their job and transfer money into a line item. So we weren't able to pay people that normally get paid on the first of the month. So we're doing a special E&A so these people can get their check for, I think it's $135. It's also not budgeted for next year.
Oh, it isn't?
No. And the thing is it bothers me that, I mean, that's $50,000 or $60,000, but the same thing happened last year, and they still, so here we are not able to pay people, and people rely on these checks. So it's just, even though it's $135, it's a supplemental check for the Medicare that we were $4,000 short for this month, and then we obviously don't have that money for next month. But, so I called a special E&A because I didn't think it was right for us to wait till Tuesday to not be able to pay people for a week later. And that's not budgeted for next year either. But it's only $50,000, $60,000, maybe they can find it someplace else. But I just want, and I don't know if Corey's gonna go to that meeting tomorrow, but somebody from the common council should be at that meeting tomorrow. If it's not Corey, usually it's Richard. If it's not Richard, now is it Kelly? I don't know.
He's the interim.
Pardon?
Kelly's the interim.
Kelly's the interim, so I says no doubt, because I don't think we invited Kelly.
All right.
I didn't appreciate that this caused such a domino to not.
Are we adjourning?
Well,
Now, this was.
do we want to take 5 minutes to talk about bonding?
I would love to talk about bonding.
All right, did you, does this,
It has all of the,
where about in the packet? So I did this handy dandy little chart
it's there.
on bonding, but I also on your agenda. On your agenda, I listed, I'm wondering if there is this issue about, in a couple cases where we're going to get reimbursement, whether we want to bond the full amount. But these are items, I've listed items that I'm wondering if we can just basically as a committee decide they require no further discussion except potentially, in the case of DGS, so parks and playground, $250,000. Is there any further discussion needed on that? DGS vehicles, they're asking $3 million. I'd be inclined to reduce it by they have $221,000 left over. I'm inclined to reduce it because in prior years they keep on having about 100. They keep on telling us, oh well, we needed the full amount, but then they have $200,000 left over. So I'd be inclined to reduce that by that amount. Roadway striping is for the project by St. Peter's, and that is likely to be partially financed by Maria College, but there's no commitment yet. But that's a relatively minor bond. Is there any question about that?
Do we have a commitment letter or agreement with
Maria College?
Maria College? That
No.
we produced? Is this
No.
verbal?
It's under discussion. It's under discussion.
That's
And it
for
would
the
only
new
be a
parking.
partial contribution to it. What?
That's for their new parking lot?
Uh-huh. So we can hold that one for, basically I'll bring that one back. Then we have the issue of the APD IT infrastructure that we approved the first phase of it last year, and they let us know about the $564,000 for the next 2 years, and they have indicated that there may be some reimbursement coming to us for that. But that is you know, a little bit more questionable in terms of how much we actually get back on that, and it will be for this specific project. Any question, any thoughts, further thoughts on that? APD, regular vehicles, I don't know, I'm betwixt and between on this one. So we'll come back to that one as an issue.
Why don't you take it out of the seizure fund?
What?
I told APD that the county took $300,000 out of the seizure funds to pay for the vehicles. And I mentioned it to
Out of the what fund?
the seizure.
Oh, yeah.
The seizure funds is $1.4 million. I said, if the county can take money out of the seizure funds for their vehicles, you have $1.4 million that you don't spend, why can't you propose taking the money out of the seizure funds? So they asked me, how do we do that? And I go, during the budget, you have to suggest that, because you have to get the capital approved, but where the money comes from, you know, so I don't know what happened after that. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
How much seizure money do they have?
I think it's 1.4 million.
Okay, so we'll bring that back for further discussion. Lincoln Park reconstruction, $1 million. Engineering, city buildings. They're using, their projects are like 1.3 million. They're using 600,000 from prior years. So this seems to be a needed and reasonable request. Street reconstruction, the only issue on this one is reimbursement, the TIPS funding. We might get 80%, so we may be able to bond a little bit less. Sidewalks and ADA compliance, there is no reimbursement, but I think we want to fund that fully. And then the AFD apparatus, I think we've got them on the right track for things. Okay, so we've made some tentative recommendations with regard to some, and that will reduce by about a quarter what we need to keep on considering the way of bonding ordinances. And hopefully, and I think some of the other bonding ordinances, like bridges, will go away. And potentially some of the ones from Chris Spencer. So thanks very much for your time, folks. I'm sorry I'm sharing a lot of my frustrations with this process.
Continuing to go through it and be,
Let me know when you're adjourned.
We're adjourned.